Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. This is the bittersweet end of an 8-week journey. This is week 8 of 8 in our webinar series. This one is about controlled inspections in New York City and how they work. So I'm very happy that this has gone with good attendance, good participation, and people sent some nice comments after. Thank you. So this is it. This is the last week of this. A little sad, but that's all right. We'll move on to bigger and better things. The world is starting to open up again. We're in different phases within New York State for opening up. Both bars and restaurants, movie theaters are coming soon. Public transportation is back, and construction is back. So we're starting to get back to some normalcy. I mean, you see some bad statistics out there for some states that are seeing some flare-ups with cases, but I think, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and this is the last week of our 8-week series. So thank you very much for watching. If it's been your first or 8th week or anything in between, I appreciate it. We're here to do this for you, and very much appreciate you taking the time to watch. So let's go ahead and dive in. Controlled inspections. So that's me and KFW Building Consultants. Let's talk a little bit about controlled inspections in New York City, and I'm going to define them in a minute. We have an hour, but I do not believe we'll be close to an hour on this one. It's not as much content, but as always, please let me know via the chat function if you have any questions or comments. So first of all, let's take a little bit of step back, and I always like to start this with, what's the question we're looking to answer? So here's today's question. We get a call from a client at a bank who says, I just started here, and I see you're mentioning in this report something about controlled inspections or doing inspection reports, or what does that mean? What are you talking about? So that's today's goal, is let's demystify that, and in specific terms to New York City, let's give it a little bit of context. So first of all, there are many responsible parties on a construction project, right? We all know this. The architect or design professional has their responsibilities for designing a safe, code compliant, zoning compliant building that's acceptable to the user, the owner, the marketplace, etc. The developer has their responsibilities for following through with whatever building they're moving ahead with the municipality or the tax credit deal, etc. The general contractor or construction manager has the responsibility of actually building or constructing or renovating this structure. Their subcontractors underneath the general contractor have the responsibility of doing their role. And then the building inspector, and they have a role as well. So in terms of today's presentation, there's 2 pieces to the building inspector piece. The first piece is not New York City. So let's just get that out of the way. So outside of New York City, most municipalities, and when I say municipality, I mean city, state, or county. Most municipalities outside New York City have their own employed inspectors. So Jersey City, New Jersey has Jersey City building inspectors. They work for the city. They are a municipal employee, and that carries with it, they're working for the city, just like a teacher or a firefighter or a police officer, etc. would. And so they are an employee of the municipality. So when we have a rural project, and we do a lot of rural projects, you have the building inspector you call, and it's one inspector that covers all the different pieces for the municipality. So that is not what we're talking about today. That's actually pretty straightforward. You call the inspector and say, hello, I'm ready for this inspection. They say, okay, I'll be by Friday morning. And then you meet them Friday and cross your fingers that you pass your inspection. That's not how it works in New York City. New York City has third-party companies that do much of the work. Not all, I'll get to that in a second. For example, underground plumbing and final inspections are done by the city. But much of the work is done by third-party companies. So as of the 1968 building code, and today we're in the 2008 building code with updates, they allowed registered architects and professional engineers to do inspections on behalf of the city. So the inspection is still occurring. It's just not being done by an employee of the city. It's being done by, for example, Controlled Inspections LLC is a private company that does this as the main part of their business. So that's very, very different than most parts of the country. Why do they do this? Well, a couple reasons. One, it takes away the city having to employ, train, staff, pay, fringe benefits, etc., an army of inspectors. Number two, the third party and the private industry can react a lot faster than the city can. So it satisfies the construction industry to have that be done. And number three, the building department looks at that professional and says, you're responsible for signing off on this. So it's not that someone's not inspecting it. It's that someone that doesn't work for the city is. So let's just show you one example as a context. Okay, here is a building that has rough work going on. And by the way, just by quick definition, rough versus finish. Rough, you don't see at the end of the job. Finish, you do see at the end of the job. So everything behind the walls, that's rough work. Everything you're looking at when it's a finished product, like tile, like sheetrock and paint, like trim work, that's finish work. So how do we get from rough work to finish work? Well, one of the things we need to do is we need to get the wall ready so that we can install the sheetrock. So for example, this wall has some rough electric, it has some rough cast iron, it has rough gas, it has rough copper, all the pieces that go behind the wall that at some point, if this were in an area outside New York City, we'd call the city to come give us the thumbs up to close up the walls. But within New York City, we would call the controlled inspector on the job for that piece. So it would look like this before and like this after. So, okay, the inspector came out. They said, yes, they have approved of the fourth floor, what have you. And now we can go ahead and install sheetrock and taping and spackling. So that's kind of the concept of what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, what is that inspection that we can move from one part, open walls, to another part, closed walls. So as of July 1st, 2008, all special inspections, controlled inspections, they've changed the term, must be conducted by a special inspection agency registered with New York City. Very similar to before it, an RA or a PE, but you have the additional step of registering with the city. So myself, I'm a registered TR8 inspector. I had to provide my licensure information. I had to provide insurance information. I had to provide information on the company. They wanted to know a little more than just a registered architect or a professional engineer stamp. You're registered to do this work. But the net effect to the industry is the same. It's being done by the private industry, not by the city. So these progress inspections occur throughout to verify work in place, like we just saw. But the special inspections also could include materials and equipment. For example, for equipment, we want to verify not just the installation of the particular boiler or water heater or fan, but that it meets or exceeds the code stated requirements on the plan documents that were approved for permitting. So it's not just work, it's also equipment. This inspection agency, special inspection agency, the controlled inspector, must be hired by the owner and the developer and not the general contractor. There was a few cases a few years ago where this kind of made the change happen. You know, in engineering, it's a little morbid, but you use the term tombstone legislation. Something happens, usually a tragedy or catastrophic or an accident, and you sit back and say, all right, how do we avoid this in the future? And there were some low concrete projects that got approved, and what they found was a couple things. So they changed the rules in New York City. One of the rules was you cannot hire as a general contractor inspector. And that kind of makes sense. Not to be a pessimist, but think about that for a minute. You can't have an inspector show up to the job and say, hey, I'm supposed to do an inspection here of the rough plumbing. And the contractor goes, yes, right this way. Oh, by the way, here's your check. That's not going to work so well. So the owner developer hires the inspection agency to police the general contractor. Police in so much as their ability to approve of or disapprove completed work. So who can become a special inspector? Well, there's 32 categories. I'm going to show you one. If you really want to geek out on this stuff, you can Google to your heart's content. I'll just show you one. And this is, by the way, right on New York City Building Department's website or New York City's website. It's right in the code. You could Google this if you want. So as an example, if you want to inspect wall panels, curtain walls, and veneers, it gives you the section of the code that's applicable. You need to be an RA or a PE, civil or structural engineering, and 1 year relevant experience for the primary inspector or the supervisor. The supplemental inspector that could report to that supervisor, bachelor's degree in architecture, civil engineering, or structural engineering, and 2 years experience. And then an alternate 2 for supplemental inspector, technician with 3 years relevant experience. So all this is doing is showing you an example of one category, wall panels, curtain walls, and veneers, and how they've defined who can become a special inspector to do that. And they are different requirements for all the different categories online you can see. So there's 3 classes for TR, which stands for technical reporting or technical report inspections. 3 classes. Class 1, major work, must be accredited with the International Accreditation Service or Accreditation Service. Big time work, structural, welds, steel, big jobs, big liability, big consequence. So class 1 is the top level that you could get as far as a approval and work to sign off. That's the top level. Then there's class 2, which is kind of a step down for that. I didn't really give much detail because then class 3 is the bookend of the other end. That's a lot less liability, sophistication, and requirements. Class 3 is limited to 1 inspection for a 1 to 3 family or 2 inspections if it's less than 10,000 square feet for a registered architect. That's the design professional on the job. And a class 3 cannot include underpinning, mechanical means and methods, and excavation. All I'm trying to show here is simply that what the building department did is they looked at all the different inspections and said, let's put them into 3 categories for risk and sophistication. Class 1's at the top, class 3 is at the bottom. A design professional can do inspections on an R3 zone or 3 stories or less. And usually that is, for example, if you're doing, 25 row style houses in Brooklyn, they can do those buildings, usually 3 stories and less. They're less sophisticated than your class 1 big, bulky, structural, ground up skyscrapers. So let's define just quickly a couple of different reports that you need. You're going to hear the term TR report or TR1. The TR1 report, I'm going to show you an example, is the statement of responsibility. So your TR1, your technical report 1, is going to say, here's who's responsible for all these different things. There's a TR2. And again, I'm showing you this because you might be out there in the field or on a phone call and someone goes, well, we need the TR2, but I'm telling you a little bit about what the numbers are. So TR2 regards concrete pouring, concrete sampling, and compression test cylinders. That's your TR2 requirement or responsibility. TR3, concrete design mix. So that's something that someone signs off on the concrete design or the recipe before we bake the cake. That's via the TR3 report. Someone has responsibility for that. And how do they have responsibility? Via that TR3. TR4 is soil inspection. TR5 is pile driving. TR6 is helical pile. Pile driving and helical pile, think of piles like hitting a hammer, helical piles like driving a screw. TR6, exterior walls and parapets and such. TR7, photoluminescent striping that you got to do in your corridors and stairways and hallways for certain buildings. TR8, energy code. I mentioned that earlier that I'm a TR8 inspector. TR15, structurally compromised buildings. And a TPP1, tenant protection plan. So there's a lot of these different forms that are part of the TR family that state what's needed on a certain job, who's going to do it on a certain job, and what's the status, or was it signed off on a certain job. So if you look at any approved plan set in New York City, they're going to state right on the plans, they have to, what TR inspections or what controlled inspections are going to be needed for that project. If you were so motivated, you could go to the New York City Building Information System. You could look up the different permits and jobs and see who is the TR inspector, who's going to be doing this work. So these things are all laid out in different capacities for the TR family of reports from 1 to 15. Now the TR1 is kind of the leader. It's a 3-page document with all types of construction sign-offs possible. And there's actually not a lot to it. In fact, there's not a lot at all. I believe in my career, about midway probably through my career, I think in my career this is going to change. Because here's all you have to do with your TR reports. You have to file who's responsible, and then you file at the end to say that they've approved it. That's it. That's all you have to do. And I'm going to show you an example in a second. Now, you can, if you want to replace an inspector mid-project, you can absolutely do that. You'd file the TR1 and state that you're changing the inspector for a certain thing or things. And the question might come up, well, can I have different inspectors for the different TRs? Absolutely. You can have one to do everything. You could have 30 to do everything. You could have one that just does mechanical pieces. You could have one that does structural, or take your structural and give some to one for steel and some to another for concrete. You can break it up any way you like, as long as you use an approved inspector, as we talked about earlier, and the paperwork is filed that they've got responsibility. Here's an example of what it looks like. This is literally all the TR1 is. It doesn't give you much info. So all we would do, let's say we have welding on this job. We would check off the box to say structural steel welding, meaning yes, we're going to need to cover that in this job. It tells us the code section. The controlled inspector that's responsible is going to initial and date column 3B. They're saying, I got it. This is on me. I own this sign off. Then when the job's done, they're going to initial and date 3C and say, I got it, I saw it, I approve it. That's it. You're done. So you're going to see this form at 2 times. Initially, with initials to who's going to be responsible, and at the end, with those people then saying they approved of it. Now that 3D is if you want to replace an inspector mid-project for whatever reason. But this is all you see on the TR1. You don't see a lot. Now, there are a lot of special and progress inspection categories. For example, there's different phases like underground work, rough work, final work. Phases meaning it's at one point in the job, and with that inspection approval, you move it to another point on the job. There's a lot of these for structural, as you can imagine, and mechanical. Do you have one for painting? No, you don't. You don't have one for painting. You don't have one for tile. You don't have one for finished carpentry. You have a final inspection by the building department. But as far as the controlled inspections, it's the stuff that you can think of from a risk standpoint that we really want to make sure someone's responsible. Risk meaning structural, mechanical, fire hazard, etc. Part of the group of the special and progress inspections are test reports. That's not actually done on the field, in the field, but a test report, a concrete cylinder. So let's demystify that a little. Here's how that works. If you're doing a pour of, I think it's over 1 cubic yard, which is hardly anything. So let's say you're doing a big pour of your cellar. You're down the basement, the cellar. Okay. The trucks pull up. Each truck carries 10 cubic yards. They start pumping this concrete down below. Now, someone is approved of, as a controlled inspection, your rebar, your lathing, meaning how you've attached your rebar, your formwork, everything's ready to go for the concrete. Someone has approved of that. Now we're putting the concrete in. What you're going to have is you're going to have the testing company that's going to be testing the concrete cylinders, A1 testing, whatever it is. They're going to come out and they're going to take about the size of a thermos, an old school thermos, about, a little bigger, but about. They're going to take 3 samples. They're literally going to fill these up with concrete as it's coming off the truck. 3. Typically 3. They're going to let them cure on site so it gets used to those environmental conditions. And then they're typically going to take them back to their lab. Usually they'll initial them or something on site so they know it's theirs. They'll bring them back to their lab and they'll crush them. And by the way, as an aside, awesome videos online about, compression test, they crush things, those huge drills and all. So they'll bring these off site. They'll crush one at 7 days. They'll crush one at 28 days. And then they have a spare. They need at 28 days to meet their ultimate 28-day strength. At 7 days, if they meet 75% of their strength, usually they're okay. But the point is, they're trying to get an idea by crushing the actual concrete to say, how strong is it? Does it meet or exceed our requirements? So the test report sign-off is not actually a field inspection. Yes, they need to gather the concrete in the field, but it's just a different element of sign-off where it's actually done off-site. And by the way, I say typical because you could do a 3-day test. You could do a 1.5-day test. It's going to be a little more money, and you'll have to set that up. But if you really want to fast-track your project, you can do those things to have that comfort level sooner rather than later that structurally we're in good shape. So those test reports are another aspect of sign-off. Footings and foundations have all sorts of sign-offs before we install our concrete. TR8, Energy Code compliance. I'm just going through some different categories of what's included. These are the things that are included. Fire resistance, a lot of fire resistance and safety inspection pieces, fire caulking, fire sprinkler, etc. Emergency lighting, and your final inspections. So there's a lot of different categories that fall in special and progress inspection. So, most of these inspections are done by a private company, but not all. For example, New York City will do an underground plumbing inspection, although if they don't show it, you can self-cert them. But New York City will do the final inspections. So they want to come out at the end. Now, if you're following along, you say, wait a minute. They come out at the end, and they're looking at a completed building. They can't even see the rough plumbing, copper, cast iron, gas, mechanical, electrical. Yeah, you're exactly right. They can't because they're relying on those controlled inspections. So although the city does a final inspection and its final construction inspection, most of these along the way, most of the entire process are done by a private company. No paperwork is required during construction. This is what I was talking about earlier, and I believe this will change. I hope it's not a catastrophe. But all you have to do at the beginning is sign who's responsible, and then at the end, put your paperwork initialed who signed off on it. You don't have to do anything during it for the controlled inspection. Your controlled inspector does. The controlled inspector is going to keep track of all their paperwork, but they don't have to submit anything until the end. An expediter will typically handle everything. Again, this is going to vary based on size and sophistication. Sometimes an architect will handle it themselves. Sometimes a contractor. Usually you have an expediter. And they'll handle who's responsible for what, the filings, the sign-offs, the paperwork, the fees, etc. Amongst all these things, of course, just remember all life and safety have to be passed for TCO. I know not all the final inspections need to be done for the permanent CO like builder's payment plan, but all your life and safety will absolutely have to be passed. The other thing as a controlled inspector, you can get audited by the city. And they actually put limits now on how many projects each controlled inspector can handle. There was a person they caught not that long, a couple of years ago, that had something like, I don't know, I think it was like 90 projects they were monitoring. And they're like, that's just impossible. They were rubber stamping it. They were just stamping it, saying, give me a check and here's a stamp. No good. So you can get audited by the city as a controlled inspector. So what they'll want to do is say, how can you prove that you signed off on this stuff? So what we do as an example, and we're certainly not the only ones, is, we said at KFW with the TR8s, well, what's the standard? And the ASTM, the people at ASTM have written a standard on how to fill out a field report. So all we do is we have that standard, we have a field report we do. So anytime we do a TR8 inspection, we fill out that field report. We keep it in-house. We give a copy to our client, but we don't have to give it to the city. Now, if they ever were to say, we're going to audit you on this, we'd have all the paperwork, all the photos, everything's in writing. Nowadays, to not have all that stuff in writing, it's so easy to take pictures with your phone to record this stuff. You need to keep that. But think about that for a minute. It's a little puzzling. Here we are in 2020, and you could have an $80 million ground-up project in Manhattan. And between who's responsible for control inspections, and the control inspections are all signed off, the city doesn't require anything. That could change, but that's how it's set up right now. So that's just in a nutshell what a controlled inspector is, private company, how it works with the different TR forms, how it works with the timing and the responsibilities, what they're signing off, and how they fit into getting from shovel in the ground to the TCO and then the final certificate of occupancy. So that's about it. I knew this one would be a little short. Looks like it's about a half hour. So I'd like to open it up to any questions or comments. If anyone has anything they want to put in the chat function. I'll just say a couple things now while you're puzzling over what you want to ask. Thank you very much for watching either today or multiple weeks. It's been really good to put this together, and the COVID-19 was the thing that said, all right, let's do this. It's time to do it. So I really do appreciate people giving their time and watching this and giving your feedback. Which inspections are most likely to fail or toughest to schedule? Haha, good question. Here's the good news. When it comes to, I don't mean to beat up the city too much, but when it comes to city inspections, that's an answer to give. Boiler inspections are tough to pass on your first time. Fire alarm with the fire department takes weeks and weeks. Here's the good news. And this is, I think, the thing that will never make these controlled inspections be pulled away from the private industry. Getting the inspections done by the controlled inspector is very friendly. And it's friendly because it's a private company. It's a company that is a for-profit, needs to serve you as their client properly in order to secure future work. So if that control inspector, you get them on the phone and you go, look, I'm going to need you for the 4th floor for this, the 7th floor for the, they might say, look, I'll stop by Friday and then next Tuesday and then next Thursday. And, they're going to react very well to the marketplace, or their competitor will. So as far as timing, the marketplace will meet the demands of the construction industry, which are tight. If you're not communicating well as a contractor, every call you put into your controlled inspectors, I need you here tomorrow. But guess what? Controlled inspectors react. They're there quickly because they know they have to. They have to move on these projects to get out and look at your work and approve or disapprove of your work. So the good news is, unlike the city inspections, these are generally very friendly with timing. And if there's an issue and they have to come back in 2 days, they'll come back in 2 days. They want to approve this and serve you, developer, as their client. There's not really any inspection that I'd say fails more than others. It's just a matter of opening that communication. I will say this, the big projects we're on, the good projects we're on, the ones that go well, the communication opens on before day one between developer and controlled inspectors to say, here's how it's going to go, here's how we're going to communicate, here's how we're going to let you know what's going on, here's what we're going to expect from you, and everyone benefits from that. That's actually what the controlled inspectors want. They want to do their job, and they want a contractor or a developer, if they're taking the lead, that's going to give them this data to keep them up to date and get them on site when they need and not give them any surprises. So that is really the silver lining with the private industry doing these inspections. Side note, We've seen some towns during COVID-19 and some cities outside New York City allow a controlled inspection kind of idea from an engineer or architect when that building department employee was not allowed to go out in the field. So that was interesting. If they didn't allow them to go in the field, they said, yeah, we'll let your mechanical engineer sign off on this for us because we can't go in the field right now. Is the process of hiring the inspector different in the case of an owner builder versus third-party GC? So yeah, what's interesting, that's a good question. When they had that problem a few years ago, the whole idea was that they do not want the control inspector working for the general contractor. They felt it was a conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest. So if you have an owner and then separately you have a general contractor, it's pretty black and white. Your owner will hire your third-party inspector. They'll monitor things on behalf of the owner. What if you have an owner builder? Okay, this can get a little sticky. Now, in a sense, you have an owner builder, you actually do have two technically different companies. They're the same people, but technically it's two different companies. So technically, they're not breaking the rules. They might have the same address, but they would file for the permits as a contracting arm and be developing it as a developer arm. But they would absolutely have to hire the third-party inspector as the owner. But the question is that a bit of a conflict of interest? You know what? It is actually a little bit, because you might technically be doing things the right way, but your third-party inspector is coming out and policing this contractor who's essentially also the owner. Yeah, we've seen that be an issue. I actually say the same of an architect. You know, a lot of times we'll have an architect who'll be very good and strong policing the contractor on behalf of their client, the owner. We've got some projects where the owner and the GC are the same, and it puts the architect in a tough spot. We as the bank representative are not in a tough spot. We're going to speak our mind, period, end of story. But it puts them in a tough spot. I would say, though, that the good news is the contractor is not looking to screw the owner if they're one and the same. In fact, some of the best builds we see are where the owner and contractor are the same because they have the long-term operation of this in mind. They're not looking to just build this, get their last check, and move on to the next job. But to say that it's completely arm's length and not an influence would be a little naive. But it's a good question, Anthony. Yeah. All right, so I don't think there's any more questions. So again, thank you very much for watching. Keep an eye out for an interview series this fall. Send me any questions, feedback, or interviewee suggestions. And until then, have a good summer, wash your hands, and thank you very much for watching. Thank you.